Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's mission overview of the upcoming Crew-8 mission, as well as NASA astronaut Tracy Dyson's mission to the International Space Station. I'm Leah Cheshire. Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to reflect that today is also NASA's Day of Remembrance. We remember the members of the NASA family who lost their lives while furthering the cause of exploration for the benefit of us all. Today, though, we are also looking forward to discussing the work and the preparation of our next space station crew members and the work between the NASA and SpaceX teams and our international partners. Joining me today, we have Steve Stitch, the manager of the Commercial Crew Program here at NASA Johnson, Joel Montalbano, manager of the International Space Station Program at NASA Johnson. On the phone line, we are joined by Sarah Walker, director of Dragon Mission Management at SpaceX, as well as remotely joined by Sergei Krikalev, executive director of Human Spaceflight Programs at Roscosmos. I'm going to turn it over to our participants for some opening remarks before we get started with the question and answer portion of today's session. Steve, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Leah, and it's great to be here today, and I thank everybody for joining and your interest in NASA Human Spaceflight Programs. As Leah said, today is our Day of Remembrance, and Joel and I got to walk over to our Memorial Grove where we have our celebration every year. It's always good to have this remembrance of our Apollo 1, Challenger, and Columbia crews, and also for me to just step back and think about the lessons learned from each of those accidents and how we can use those in our program today. It's an exciting time to be here and ready for proceeding toward the Crew-8 launch. Our NASA and SpaceX teams are getting all the hardware and all the certification ready to go for that launch. I want to thank our entire team across the country, across all the NASA centers, our NASA contractors and SpaceX for their diligence in getting ready to go for this mission. In terms of our launch date, we're looking at a launch date in the late February timeframe. There's a lot of activity at the Kennedy Space Center, in particular at Pad 39A. There is a NASA Commercial Lunar Payload Services mission in that mid-February timeframe, and so Joel and I have been working with that program, and we're going to try to work around and give them a window. I know there's a briefing coming up on that mission in the next several weeks that they'll tell you a little bit more about the Intuitive Machines landing mission to the South Pole. In terms of our spacecraft status, Endeavour is the spacecraft we're going to go fly. It's our first time to fly this spacecraft for the fifth time. It was the spacecraft we flew for Demo 2, and it's hard for me sitting here to talk about flying it for the fifth time, but that is our plan. That spacecraft is doing really well. All the spacecraft components are down at Dragonland and at the Kennedy Space Center, and Sarah will talk more about Dragon processing. The next big milestone really is to mate the Dragon vehicle with the trunk. We spent a lot of time checking out the prop system just to make sure it's ready to go with some of the corrosion issues that we've talked about for previous flights, and so the prop system's been checked out and it's all ready to go. In terms of our launch vehicles, the second stage for the Falcon 9 rocket is there already at the hangar at KSC, and then we should have the first stage there sometime next week, and so we'll have all the components there and they'll go through their final processing for flight. The crew is doing really well. They went down on January 12th to the Kennedy Space Center to Dragonland to check their spacecraft out. I happened to be on a similar flight for them, and I got to see Matt and Mike and Jeanette and Alexander, and they're really excited to go fly the mission. When I talked to them last week, they're ready to go, and they're very excited. What's next for us is really to just start going through all the final certification work. Joel will talk about his first review coming up Friday. We'll get into the flight readiness review process. And then, of course, we don't forget about Crew-7. We'll launch Crew-8, and then, we'll have about 5 dock days or so, and then we'll plan to bring Crew-7 home in early March. That vehicle is doing well in orbit. And, the one big activity we'll do before, we'll check it out. Obviously, we'll power Dragon up and check it out, and then we'll do a thermal protection system survey with robotic assets on Space Station. So we're looking forward to Crew-8, looking forward to getting Crew-7 home, and with that, I'll turn it over to Joel.
Hey, thank you, Steve. Steve mentioned the readiness review. So on the Space Station schedule, we're having the readiness review for Crew-8 and the Crew-7 return tomorrow. And so that kind of sets us up for the readiness review process that we have a readiness review in the station program. There's a commercial crew readiness review, a SpaceX readiness review, and then at the end we'll have an agency readiness review down at the Kennedy Space Center. We're excited about Crew-8. Having another crew coming to the International Space Station is always a fun thing to talk about. Once they get on board, we'll have about a 5 to 7 day handover with probably closer to 5 days with the Crew-7 and Crew-8, depending on weather and how things go there. The Crew-8 mission, they'll be up there about 180 days, so we're looking at our end of that mission in late August. That team is scheduled to do about 200 experiments in science, research, technology development, and commercialization activities in low Earth orbit. So looking forward to that mission. Continuing on in the theme of crews, we have a Soyuz mission scheduled for March 21st and out of Baikonur. And we'll have Tracy Caldwell will be our astronaut on that mission. So we're looking for Tracy and the Oleg and Marina, an awesome mission there. The launch time for that mission is pretty nice. Houston time, 8:08 a.m. or 20:08:21 a.m. Central Time for that mission. On board the Axiom 3, we had an awesome launch last week and a good docking over the weekend. The Axiom 3 mission continues to integrate well with the onboard crew. This is our longest private astronaut mission, so 14 dock days to the International Space Station. And so right now we're targeting a February 3rd undock, and as we get closer, we'll go ahead and look at the landing weather, and then that may be adjusted. Switching over to cargo, the Northrop Grumman team is moving back to the Kennedy Space Center with the Cygnus spacecraft, and the Cygnus spacecraft will launch on a Falcon rocket Monday, 11:29 Central Time. And that sets us up for a rendezvous with the berthing and capture on the 31st early in the morning, about 2:30 a.m. Central Time. Following that mission, we'll have a Progress launch, and that's scheduled for the evening of Valentine's Day Central Time. And so looking forward, ISS continues to be a busy place. Last few months, we've been talking a lot about 25 years of the International Space Station, and we're not stopping rocking and rolling. So just an awesome place to be. A huge thank to Steve and the Commercial Crew Program, our international partners, our domestic space partners that make all this happen, and of course, all my colleagues in the International Space Station Program. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sarah.
Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to speak to you about our preparations for the Crew-8 mission as well, coming up next month. I do want to acknowledge today's day of remembrance as well. We at SpaceX are driven forward daily, but especially today, by a deep awareness that this industry is only doing the exciting things it is doing today because we stand on the shoulders of men and women who bravely went before us. So we want to learn from their legacy. We want to build upon the path that they set us on, and always prioritizing human life above all else in every single decision that we make. So thanks to NASA for the bar that you've set and the ways you continue to partner and guide us into this bright future. Over here at SpaceX, we've had an exciting start to the year. We've had 7 missions launched since New Year's Day just a few weeks ago. A week ago today, as Joel mentioned as well, we launched our first human spaceflight mission of the year, which was AX-3. And then 2 days later, this past weekend, Saturday morning, Dragon Freedom, carrying the AX-3 crew, joined Dragon Endurance, which was on board the space station with the Crew-7 crew. So we hope the Axiom mission accomplishes everything they hope it will in terms of science on board. And thanks, Joel, for dedicating some of your resources and crew members to helping support that mission up there. And we look forward to bringing them safely home next week. Additionally, as Joel also mentioned, we're about to launch our first Cygnus spacecraft cargo resupply mission to the station on Monday, which is an absolute honor that Falcon 9 gets to support and participate in crew and cargo missions in multiple ways, and we look forward to many more missions. As for Crew-8 and Dragon Endeavour, which Steve mentioned is the name of this 5th flight Dragon spacecraft, our teams continue to prepare the vehicles for launch with one of the final International Space Station readiness reviews coming up tomorrow. The booster, which happens to be a first flight booster, this mission shipped to the Cape on Monday, this past Monday, where It'll join stage 2, which is already in the hangar at Pad 39A in Florida awaiting launch. The Dragon spacecraft completed some major gates just before Christmas, including prop checkouts, heat shield mate, and closeout. And the crew also had the opportunity to complete their test drive a couple of weeks ago, which is when they get into their flight vehicle and at the Cape, and they check out all the connections between their seats and their flight suits and audio and environmental control and more. I think I'll just conclude with saying human spaceflight is core to SpaceX's ultimate mission, and flying crew safely is always our top priority today and every day. We only launch when we're ready. I think you've heard us say that 100 times on these calls. But so far things are going great for Crew-8, and we're on track for a launch next month. Thank you for including me in today's briefing. Thank you to NASA and Roscosmos for your trust and partnership, and I'm happy to take any questions you have about this exciting mission. I think we'll hear some words from Sergey first.
Good afternoon or good evening, Moscow time. Today with this flight, on this mission, we will continue our program of what we call exchange flight or integrated crew program. We prove that this type of program is very convenient for both sides, and Alexander, when he fly up and join the crew, will join Oleg Kononenko and Nikolai Chup on orbit. As was already said, that very soon, on mid of February 15th actually, Moscow time, we will fly next cargo mission, and in mid of, actually 22nd of March, we are planning to send visiting crew on orbit, also with this exchange of American crew member for the mission on orbit. So that's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergey, and thank you to all of our briefers and participants today. We'll now move into the question and answer portion of our session. Just a reminder, if you're on the phone line, please press *1 to be admitted to the queue. And if you've heard your question previously be answered, please press *2 to remove yourself from the queue. Please state your name and affiliation and to whom your question is addressed, and please limit yourself to one question at this time. We will start here in the room.
Mark Carreau with Aviation Week and Space Technology. My question's for Joel, and I've got to apologize. I didn't quite understand everything Sergey said, but I think he did mention continuing the launch crew seat exchange. But could you kind of tell us where that stands at this point?
Oh, good question. Yes, we do plan to continue the integrated crew exchange. Just last year, we signed another agreement with Roscosmos. And these agreements are done at NASA Roscosmos level, and then also at the government level. And so what we agreed last year was a second flight in 2024, and then one in 2025. And so we do these, kind of work it a few flights at a time, and pick up lessons learned and move forward. But we do plan to continue integrated crew.
Okay, we have another question in the room.
Thank you. Hi, Will Robinson-Smith with Spaceflight Now. Thanks for taking our questions. I suppose follow up on that to Joel as well as to Sergey. In looking forward to future crew seat swaps, will Boeing Starliner be brought into that mix following its certification flight no earlier than April? And what are those ongoing conversations like? Thanks.
Sure. No, good question. Absolutely. Our plan is to include Boeing in the crew swaps. And our discussions with Roscosmos, we're continuing. We want to see, the CFT, pick up the lessons learned on the CFT mission. That'll happen in April of this year. And so once that's done, but we're laying all the groundwork, and the plan is to continue integrated crews with both SpaceX and Boeing for our future. And Sergey, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, we already discussed how we do this integration, and for sure it will maybe make our planning on the ground. Planning is a little more complex, but yes, we are planning to include Boeing spacecraft for exchange missions in the future. Yes.
Okay. We will move to the phone line to take a question. This from Jeff Faust.
Probably for Joel or Steve, you mentioned moving the Crew-8 launch to late February. Are there any activities either on the station or on the ground that you would have to work around when you finally set that launch date in late February or thereabouts? Thanks.
I can start, and then we'll let Joel add. You know, as I spoke earlier, the one thing on the ground is we're going to work around a very important NASA commercial lunar payload services mission to deliver NASA payloads to the South Pole of the Moon, and we'll talk more about that in a subsequent briefing. But they use the same launch pad. The mission is Intuitive Machines, and they use Pad 39A for that mission. It can only fly off 39A, and so that's one thing on the ground we're having to work around a little bit is we know it's a high priority mission. They only have a number of launch dates like any planetary mission does, and so we're going to let, you know, if they're ready to go, we'll let them go, and we'll have Crew-8 just slightly after their mission. And I'll let Joel answer the complexity of the traffic on board the ISS.
Yeah, so we talked about the Axiom 3 mission going currently on board. We're looking forward to the Northrop Grumman Cygnus spacecraft. And so all these missions, we've kind of laid out a good plan, and we can easily support the late February late February date for the Crew-8.
Okay. Our next question is on the phone from Stephen Clark.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Stephen Clark, Ars Technica. I think my question's for Joel and Sergey. I know the U.S. government and the Russian government have committed to 2030 and 2028 supporting the ISS through those dates respectively. Are there, on the technical side of things, for both of you from the U.S. and Russian perspective, are there any, have there been any technical assessments of the durability of the structure of the various elements of ISS to see, you know, how far they can go beyond 2030, and what have those assessments told you, if they have been done?
Okay. I'll start, and then I'll hand over to Sergey. You know, from a U.S. standpoint, what really drives your lifetime of the International Space Station is your day-night cycles. And you take a look at your big structures on board, and you know how are things going to last. And we've kind of looked at 2030, and we're starting to now just be prepared through that if someone asked us to go longer. And right now there's nothing magical that happens in 2030. There's no big concern in 2030 that says, hey, we need to stop. And so the important thing is, you know, as you guys know, as an agency, we're looking at commercial LEO destinations. We want them to be supportive, and then when they're ready to go, that's when ISS will move out of the way. So from a NASA standpoint, we're not tracking anything. There's no major occurrence in 2030. And I'll hand it over to Sergey if you want to talk.
And I want to just add that we have different dates when we are going to continue our flights, but it's not because we have some kind of disagreement. It's just because the cycle of extending life of the station is done on 4-year cycle on our side. And you asked how long a station can work in the future. We don't really know. That's why we continue our flight, do our tests, and see what new data we get to make assessment for the future lifetime extension. So we also are going to continue testing on board to see if we can fly longer and how far we can fly longer.
Thank you both. And our next question on the phone is from Marsha Dunn.
Yes, hi. Question for both Sergey and Joel. Sergey, you have 2 cosmonauts who are in the midst of a 1-year mission. How valuable are those long 1-year missions for your knowledge base for future space travel? And Joel, any hopes of getting an American up there to spend more time in space, especially as NASA is looking ahead to the Moon and Mars? Thank you.
And if we talk about long duration flight, we start to fly 1-year mission actually pretty long time. In the beginning of Mir program, be more exact, on Expedition 3 of Mir, which flies 1987, 1988, they flew actually a leap year in space. 366 days they spent in space, and it was the first time when humans were flying so long. But for medical science, very important is statistics. So every time our crew members are flying longer, we get new data, we get more knowledge. And if you said about flying to moon, maybe it's not as important because flight to moon not as long as our long duration flight on the station, but this kind of flights would be very useful for flights to Mars or maybe asteroids.
And let's see, from my side, we're talking with our human research program. They would like additional 1-year subjects. What we've been talking about is we want to get both Boeing and SpaceX flying regularly to the International Space Station. And then once that's done, we'll figure out where to place these 1-year missions. But right now, there's no immediate, nothing in the near future for a U.S. astronaut to go for a year.
Okay. Our next question on the phone is from Bill Harwood.
Yeah, hey guys. This is for Steve, I think. Could you give us a little more clarity on Crew-8 launch dates? And I realize these things aren't set yet, but the question really is, if Intuitive launches on time, what's the earliest Crew-8 could launch? And conversely, if Intuitive slips out of the February launch period, what's the earliest Crew-8 could launch? Thanks.
Yeah, good questions, Bill, and that's exactly what Joel and I are looking at. I would say if Intuitive Machines launches on time, we would be more toward the very end of February, the 29th, or even March 1st, if they launch on their first opportunity, Intuitive Machines. If they slipped out of the window, I suspect we could go as early as maybe around the 22nd or so of March. So rough. And Joel and I will kind of formalize this next week at our joint program control boards, and we'll get that out. But that's kind of the time frame we're thinking right now. That range of, somewhere around the 22nd through the end of February, maybe 1st of March.
And we have another question in the room.
Thank you, Mark Corot from Aviation Week in Space Technology. Who's in line to command Expedition 71?
Your glasses.
Want me to look at it?
Yeah. We're always working together here.
I can read it for you if you need me to.
Yeah. Oh. Oleg Kononenko is going to stay the commander. I'm sorry. Yeah, that was because he's up there for a year. It doesn't make sense to swap out. Once you're a commander, it doesn't make sense when you're still on board to swap out. And so Oleg will stay the commander.
Okay. Thank you all for joining today. It looks like that's all the questions that we have on the phone and in the room. And we hope that you'll stay tuned for our Crew-8 and Tracy Dyson news conference later this afternoon. Thank you.